Well, I was telling someone, yesterday was prom too. So we had my mother's service, and then it was prom, and then we had relatives, and so I didn't have time to prepare a sermon. So you're just going to get the same one I did yesterday. I just told the praise team, I said, well, I'm just going to change a couple of the names and see if you notice, All right, that's not true, of course, but I was talking to my wife in the car last night, and I was thinking about this sermon and about the reading that Steve just read, because today's Good Shepherd Sunday, and this is a key image for the Bible. In fact, this is the image, like they did an early childhood development study in a very Montessori way, and they found out that the image that children hit on the most from the Bible is the Good Shepherd. There's something natural about this relationship that is constant, and if you look at early Christian art in the catacombs and other places, the Good Shepherd is a primary image. And he tells us that a key part of his shepherding isn't the staff, isn't the rod, it's the voice. And did you know that human beings are the only mammals that can choke on their food? We're the only mammals that can choke on our food. Now, of course, you've had a dog get something stuck and they cough it up. We're talking about literally stuff getting stuck because we're the only mammals whose throats elongate in the way that they do so that speech is possible. So if you've ever choked on a steak or something, think your larynx, your pharynx, your ability to speak, your stretched vocal cords. And the human voice is so unique in the entire world of nature. 800 different sounds it can make, unique sounds it can make and recognize. And it's this most complex instrument, more complex than any musical instrument, is the human voice. And so your voice has a print like your fingerprints. We could distinguish, and you know that. Sometimes like people will appear again and they go, I know that voice. Where is he? Or we'll say to her, don't use that voice with me. The voice is it communicates a lot, it shares a lot, but it's also distinctive to who we are. And if you think of the voice in the Bible, the voice of God creates. God speaks things into being. That's where that word abracadabra comes from. It's sort of a misspoken or misunderstood way of saying I create by speaking. This idea I can speak reality into existence, as God does in chapter 1. The Father announces his presence through speech, like at the baptism of Jesus and at the raising of Lazarus. The Father is primarily shown by speaking, if we're going to recognize God at all. And so Jesus tells us, my voice is going to be the voice that you need to pattern yourself to. Like think of the Easter story where Mary comes and she's looking around and she's crying, and in the midst of her grief and in her brokenness, Jesus is standing right next to her and she misidentifies him. She just thinks it's one of the landscapers is here early. He didn't have a leaf blower, but it would have been cool if he had a leaf blower. He's like, no, it's not a leaf blower, it's just the Holy Spirit. But sorry, I just start going, But Jesus looks at her and Jesus says, Mary. And there's immediate voice recognition. This is way better than the voice recognition on your phone. This is the voice recognition that comes out of your heart and says, oh, that's right. That's who I am. God is always calling us back to ourselves. There's a forgetting that happens. There's a disconnecting that happens. And when Jesus says to Mary, Mary, one word, she recognizes the voice of the shepherd. She comes back to herself and she reorients her life in relationship to Christ. And that's this image of shepherding is always in relationship. Jesus is not here to just set a bunch of people free to just go live out their best lives on their own. That's sort of American spirituality. Get what you can get, do whatever you can do, take what you can take, and just live your best life. And what Jesus is proposing is, no, live your best life in relationship to me, because there are going to be places I call you that you're going to need to go that you may not want to go or didn't know you needed to go. So the whole life of discipleship is not learn a lot, memorize a lot, go to a lot of classes, donate a lot. Literally, Jesus just says, follow my voice. Follow the voice. Come on, follow me. But if you can't recognize the voice, then you're in trouble, because it turns out his isn't the only voice. And we have to hear his voice in the midst of voices. So what are some of the criteria we can identify when it's the voice of the Good Shepherd and not the voice of someone else? And Jesus' alternatives aren't really hot. They're not like, well, it's either going to be the Good Shepherd or the decent shepherd. Maybe an okay shepherd. It's the Good Shepherd, or it's a thief, a liar, someone who's coming to steal. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Jesus' criteria of what good shepherding looks like was in what Amy read from Psalm 23, this very famous psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So there's already this idea of you will be provided for. Do you remember, I told you this, the kingdom of heaven that's announced in the Gospels is only about two things. If you look at the ministry of Jesus, it's about healing and forgiveness. And Jesus is constantly healing people and forgiving people. And oftentimes those two things go together, that healing and forgiveness have a psychological, spiritual, and physiological effect. And so oftentimes the forgiving of someone can also be a healing, a literal healing of something, because we hold all these things in our body or they're written onto our flesh in a subrational way. And so this idea of healing and forgiveness means that he's only going to shepherd us between those two poles. And you see that in Psalm 23. It says, when I look behind me, goodness and mercy follow me all the days of my life. I don't look behind me and say, well, there's all the, God did this and God did that to me. Now, I may have other things in my wake or other things on my trail that came from the other voices. Because the problem with sheep is sheep are stupid. Not to say that you're sheep, if we want to push but they're constantly being pushed by their appetites to follow different things, and so we get tangled up in stuff, we get injured by stuff, and the shepherd will come and untangle us, but sometimes we carry stuff in our wake that needs to be healed or forgiven. That's why the ministry of the gospel is to heal and forgive, and if you look behind you, it says you will only see goodness and mercy. That's God's legacy for you. And if you don't see that, it's not from God. If you do see that, it is from God. And if you see a lot of other stuff there, you might want to ask yourself, what are the other voices that I'm patterning myself onto? It's like when people get patterned by like a bird. They go, oh, that baby duck thought I was its mother and it followed me around. We have to be very careful who we attach ourselves to or pattern ourselves to, because we might end up following the wrong person or following the wrong duck or whatever image you want to use for that. Now, the other things we see, think of that, this psalm is so familiar, so it's a little bit too familiar, and so we sometimes forget what it's actually saying. It says, when I see my enemies, and we're not just talking about people that annoy me, people that are obnoxious, people that, on a good day we're fine, on a bad day we're not. These are people that want to hurt you, undermine you, manipulate you, destroy you. And it doesn't say, in the presence of my enemies, you said, let's go head to head and pile their bodies up in front of me. Just make a big pile of my enemies' bodies so I can gloat over them and say, see, you shouldn't have messed with me. I follow God. We have these fantasies of violence that are not consistent with where the shepherd's calling. Goodness and mercy exempt a lot of vengeance, in fact, all vengeance, if you want to think about it. Because it says, in the presence of my enemies, you do one thing, you prepare a table. I'm going to eat. Now you could say, I'm going to eat because I'm not afraid. Well, that's bold and courageous. I'm also going to eat because that's what he did for us. If you think of the Last Supper, he prepared a table in the presence of his enemies. Not his friends. They all thought he would. See, this is the problem. Everyone thinks they're God's friend. But in the earliest moment, they walk away, they run away, they betray, they murder. Because that's what's sort of hidden deep within us. These things are sort of churning in us. And Jesus didn't go, you know what, I know what's deep inside your hearts, and I'm not going to be fooled by you. He says, let me make a place where I'll eat with you and take my enemies and make them friends. That's what he does. He takes his enemies and makes them friends. Paul says that in Romans. While we were still far off, he came and saved us. He didn't wait for us. He saved us. The shepherd came and saved us, pulled us out of the fire, and then healed us. And then we're like, when are you going to come and do something? And he's like, it's already done. I already collected you. And now pattern your life to my voice and recognize that some of these activities, which include feasting with enemies for reconciliation, finding goodness, finding mercy, finding peace, these are the things that the shepherd's calling you to. This is why Jesus uses the image of the gate. Now, I know for people that love Bible verses, some of you are just so profoundly moved by I am the gate. People go, oh my gosh, I love to think of Jesus as a gate. Nobody thinks that. Nobody would want that. No one wants a cross-stitch on their grandmother's wall that says, I am the gate. Or I am the... We think of gatekeeping as something negative. Oh, what are you, gatekeeping? You're going to gatekeep this for me? All over the internet. Oh, what are you, a gatekeeper? Jesus says, I am the gate. So why does he say that? Because when the shepherd is moving the sheep from place to place to place to place, they're on a journey somewhere. They're on the journey to the next pasture, onto the journey to the next thing. Follow me to the next place of rest, the next place of eating and goodness. Well, they're going to have to sleep at night, and they would have the sheep pen. But if you're out in the middle of nowhere, sometimes the sheep pen was just a a set of bushes, sometimes a set of hedges, sometimes it would be a brick enclosure, but none of these things had gates or doors, because the shepherd himself would lie down in the gap, meaning that if you wanted to come at the sheep, you were going to have to go through him first to get to the sheep. So when he says, I am the gate, he literally means, I am the gate. I'm the one who's going to put you in a safe place, and then I'm going to be the one that puts myself on the perimeter so that if danger comes, it will come to me first. And I'm doing that for you. But then, of course, Jesus says there are other people who are outside the wall saying, hey, come over here, come over here. Sheep, put your head over the wall, see what's over here. I had a friend of mine, my sister will remember Matt Arnold. We grew up with a lot of strange kids, and he was a very strange child. But he was strange in a wonderful way, because he had grown up, his father had been a doctor for the UN in Indonesia. And he goes, I remember we were living in this compound in Indonesia, and the Indonesians at the time where they lived, in a bad neighborhood in Jakarta, they would put candy bars on the wall, hoping that the kids would come and take it, and then they could grab you and try and ransom you back to your family. He never got kidnapped. Though sometimes we wish he had, just because it was like, well, that would have been a good story. But it's this idea of don't go outside the wall. You know, I've put you in a place, stay right here, and if danger comes, let me protect you. That's why he says you have to come through me. And if you're not coming through me, if it's not defining this goodness in relationship, it's literal communion. It's not like Jesus just gives you a kit and sends you out on your own. This relationship becomes so vital, then you're going to be lied to, you're going to be stolen, you're going to be damaged. And we live in a time where people are so untrusting. We were talking last night in the car about, in a different conference, this is a different car ride because we were just driving all over the place. We're talking about conspiracy theories. What's actually happening right now? You know, what's actually happening in the world? We don't know. People are coming up with conspiracy theories about everything that happens now because they're afraid that everything they're being told they're being lied to. Well, who did you hear that from? Was it from MSNBC or Fox News? Which one do you listen to? Of course, sheep. You know, you're a sheep. Well, you're a sheep too. Did you go to Good Shepherd Sunday? But it's the idea that we can't trust the voices that we're hearing. And people are getting bombarded with information, and they're going, who's telling me the truth? Who wants to lead me to life? Who's tricking me? Who's lying to me? And in a world of lies, we need people who are patterned to and listening to the voice of the Good Shepherd saying, now we go over here, now we go over here, this is the work, this is the rest, this is the healing, this is the forgiveness, this is the goodness and kindness, this is the table in the enemies, this is the path through the valley of the shadow of death. That's why Psalm 23 compacts so much wonderful stuff, because at the end of the psalm, you're going to the house. You know, you will dwell with me forever. So we're on this journey. We know where we're going. We're going to the Father's house. And that's step by step how we get there. But there are going to be other voices. And this isn't a theoretical idea of sheep stealing. Think of human trafficking. In Orange County, the number one reason for human trafficking is sex with children. In Northern California, the largest reason is people who are kidnapped for their labor, trafficked for their labor. So depending on where you live, it's either sex or labor that people are mostly trafficked for. And it's the idea that the human being, or the sheep, can be reduced to an object that we can use to generate revenue, either through their body or through their labor. And so, you know, sometimes they were breaking up these large cannabis farms, illegal cannabis farms in Humboldt County, and when they would let go all of the farm workers, and we were working on this project in Orange County, they were like, well, go home. And they're like, I don't even know where I am. And they're like, you're not from Humboldt County? No, I'm from Guatemala. How did you get here? I don't know. A cartel put me on a plane, sent me here. They go, so now what they started to do is treat these people as victims of crimes. Because they had been a victim of a crime, to be human trafficked, it's sort of this victim-centered restitution and justice that sheriff's departments in rural California counties were adopting, because they recognized that the people who were being trafficked were victims of crimes and not just participants in something nefarious. This is what we mean by sheep stealing. This is what we mean by lying. The people who are more than happy to take sheep, promise them something, or lie to them about something, and manipulate them into an objectified existence, rather than an existence where there's good food, good drink, goodness and mercy, reconciliation with enemies, healing and forgiveness. And Jesus makes very clear that this is the purpose of the entire program. I only came, and we said this yesterday at my mother's funeral, I only came to save you. I'm not here to mess around with the other stuff. The people who are lying to you, the people that are hurting you, the people that are damaging you and murdering you, that's not me. I am here to shepherd you. And if you look behind me, you'll know I was there by goodness and mercy. And when you look behind me and see other stuff, or if you find yourself reduced by someone else's evil or nefarious violence, I can redeem that too. And that's why that table in front of the enemies is so important, especially when it's the Eucharistic altar, because the enemies have no power. God will take what they use to intimidate and dehumanize, and God will go, I'll use that to save you. Not because it's from God, it's not from God. It's rejected by God, but it's transformed by God. This is the alchemy of the Holy Spirit. God takes death and makes it life. And because of that gift, we too shall live and be with the Good Shepherd forever. May we hear his voice today and always. Amen.